Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and I hope you're doing well tonight. My channel name is Discerning What is True. I am actually on Odyssey and YouTube and on Facebook. You will have to go into YouTube and also at Odyssey. I don't remember, but I know you have to go to YouTube, what they call live videos. So we're going to continue to work through the book Woe Unto You Lawyers by Fred Rodell. And this is going to be chapter 9 as I begin to read tonight and hope that all are well tonight. Okay? Chapter 9, Incubators of the Law is the title of the chapter. And then we have an anonymous statement here. The legal apprentice, he sweats and he strains to memorize every principle. He'll learn a lot more in the end for his pains by studying something simple. As every good fascist knows, the perpetuation of the fascist fraud depends in the long run on the training of the fledgling in the faith. And I'm going to check something out real quick here. The dictators catch their conscripts young and discipline them to think in goose steps. Promises of reward for the faithful and ominous warnings about the dangers of nonconformity play their part in making apprentices firmly believe a mask of lies, half lies, and nonsense. Doubt, even the tiniest wondering doubt, is the cardinal sin. There are few heretics. The law cannot catch its communicants so young, but the same mental goose steps and the same kind of hopes and fears are used, perhaps not so purposely, but just as effectuously, to instill a fighting belief in the nonsense of the law. And of course, it is on the rigid training of apprentice in the art that the perpetual of the legal legend depends. There was a time when the law, like other more substantial and more useful trades, was learned in the shop of a full blown practitioner. A aspiring lawyer studied his precepts and his principles while serving a term as office assistant to some member of the bar. Today, the members of the bar most usually pay for their assistance with something more than a lot of legal language, dressed up as words of wisdom. The trade has acquired academic pretenses, and these citadels of logic, legerdemain, known as law schools, are not the incubators of the law. Consequently, the hope of the law, that is, the hope of the lawyers that their game will go on indefinitely, undiminished, and undisputed, lies with the law schools. And conversely, the one slim hope that the big balloon of inflated nonsense may ever be exploded by internal combustion lies with the law schools, too. Once the profession givers jugglers have proceeded beyond the training stage, it is almost always too late. They have to be caught young in the law to be turned into disciplines or disciples or heretics. In order to teach apprentices how to talk the language and how to reason in the proper abstract circles, the law school has divided the law mass of principles into big chunks. Each chunk represents a field of law and is taught in a separate course, of course, you see. These are the contracts and torts and trusts. There are constitutional law and criminal law and labor law. There are fields, of course, by the score. Of course, an actual case may fall into several fields at the same time. It may involve, for instance, the Constitution and a crime and a labor dispute. But that will not phase the law schools. So far as they are concerned, it is the principles, not the cases, that really matter. And so the same case will show up in constitutional law and in criminal law and in labor law. It will not, however, show up in the same way. In constitutional law, the relevant principles of the constitutional law will be examined. In criminal law, the relevant principles of criminal law will be examined. In labor law, the relevant principles of labor law will be examined. In each one of the courses, the aspect of the case that falls into either or other two course categories will be either glossed over or omitted entirely. A student may thus have to take 3 courses in order to understand thoroughly, even from the legal standpoint, what one decision is all about, but not in order to learn any one field of law. Thus, law school courses, since they are cut out of the pseudoscience of law, inevitably focus on generalities and abstractions rather than on the solution of specific problems. A student might even study a case in a dozen different courses and thus learn all about the law of the case and still not have the slightest comprehension of or insight into the real down-to-earth factual difficulty or controversy they brought the case into court. Sometimes a field of law is too big to be stuffed into one course. For example, property law is commonly divided into real property and personal property. Neither real nor personal, of course, means what it means in everyday conversation, and wills and mortgages and negotiable instruments and several more. But then property law is for the most part only a big branch of contract law. Moreover, corporation law, a field extension enough to have various subdivisions of its own, in its essence nothing but a branch of property law. It is almost as hard to keep straight the hierarchy of legal fields and courses that is to sort out the abstract principles of which the different courses are construed. And either process is likely trying to cut water with a knife. One of the biggest and strangest fields of legal learning is something known as pleading and procedure. The law schools divide pleading and procedure into many courses, and some of these courses, like evidence, are rated as fields unto themselves. But the strange thing about pleading and procedure is not its size. Property law is at least as big as full of principles. The strange thing is that the lawyers and the law school do not even pretend to themselves that the principles and rules of pleading and procedure have anything to do with the solution of practical problems. Pleading and procedure is admittedly just a lot of verbal complications and technicalities that lawyers have to memorize or know where to look up before they can practice their trade. And that omission is, of course, unique in the law. As a matter of fact, the lawyers and the law schools lump the whole remaining of the law together, contract and criminal law, and trust and torts, and the rest of the card catalog of abstract principles, and call it all substantial law, as opposed to the adjective or procedure law or the pleading and procedure courses. The term substantial law is supposed to imply that the principles of contracts and torts and the rest really cope with the substance of human or social problems. But even the lawyers can't make such a claim for pleading and procedure. Pleading and procedure covers all the principles and rules of law which govern the way lawyers may make use of other principles and rules of law. If that sounds complicated, so is pleading and procedure. For P&P encompass the code of precepts according to which the legal game is played. Once a dispute actually starts on its way into court, and when you begin dealing with a lot of abstract principles about the proper manipulation of other abstract principles, you can't help getting somewhat confused. Don't suppose either that the principles and rules of P&P are, for the most part, any more precise or any less ambiguously than other principles of law. A bit of evidence at a trial does not fall into the famous irrelevant, incompetent, and immaterial classification any more automatically than a killing falls into a second-degree murder. A legal dispute does not involve 2 separate cases of action, which only means that it will probably have to be tried in 2 separate lawsuits, any more readily or scientifically than a piece of paper with writing on it involves a executor contract. The principles of P&P are just as slippery when you try to apply them to the facts of trying a lawsuit, as other legal principles when you try to apply them to the facts that lie behind a lawsuit. Moreover, even though the P&P principles admittedly contribute nothing at all to the actual solution of the problem that the law is called on to solve, the decision in any law case is likely to be hung on a procedure rule as on substantial principle. All too often, not only justice, but also the regular principles of substantial law are thrown out the window simply because some lawyer in handling his case, in handling his client's case, has forgotten or violated a procedure rule. Thus, a killing may be without so much as a legal doubt a punishable murder, and still the murderer may go free for time or even for good, just because a bit of evidence used in the trial is labeled irrelevant, incompetent, and immaterial. A man with a legal claim so clear and valid that neither a lawyer nor a non-lawyer would question his right to have this claim satisfied may get nothing out of it except a bill for counsel fee, simply because his lawyer, at some stage of the case, has been caught using the wrong words according to the principles of pleading and procedure. Perhaps all of this discussion of the P&P field may seem irrelevant, incompetent, and immaterial to the question of how the law schools go about producing consecrated devotees of the law. Yet there is this to remember: the lawyers in the law school admit that P&P, or practice, as this altered field is sometimes called, deals exclusively with the tricks of the trade. The legal neophytes are told that what they learn under the heading of P&P constitutes the technique of the lawyer's art. As a dentist learns how to handle his drill, so a lawyer learns his P&P. By contrast, the rest of the law, the substantial principles of property and quasi-contracts, oh yes, there is that too, and corporations and all, are pounded into the young legal brain as ultimate truths about life, even after the apprentice graduates from law school. When he comes to take his bar examination, he will find distinctly carefully preserved. One part of his ordeal will test his knowledge of substantial law. The other part will test his knowledge of pleading and procedure. One represents wisdom, the other represents skill. What the law apprentice rarely learns and already are rarely given half a chance to find out is that the whole of law is nothing but a technique to be mastered, a minutes to be achieved. That technique, reduced to its simplest terms, is the technique of using new language. That is all the law student learns in his courses of P&P. That is also the law student learns in his courses in substantial law. But because the former are frankly labeled technique and the latter are labeled truth, the student comes to believe implicitly that there is a gapping difference in kind, where actually there is scarcely so much as a difference in degree. This original burden of proof is on the plaintiff. It's a principle of P&P and may help a lawyer win a lawsuit. If the defendant action was not the proximity cause of the injury, then the defendant is not legally responsible. It's a principle of torts and help a lawyer win a lawsuit. All that a student ever learns about either of these principles or about any other principles of either division of law is how to say them and when and where it may be useful to say them. The point is that the law schools, by admitting that one segment of legal education deals with the devices of the trade, makes quite possibly the fable that the rest of the law represents something much more solid. With the procedure courses frankly set to one side as technique, the big empty words and the vague abstract principles of the other courses assume a more credible aura of depth and reality to the newcomer. He can and does then believe that the words have meaning and that the principles are nuggets of wisdom, and it is essential to the perpetuation of the legal legend that he should believe this, or it would be fatal to the profession, to his self-respect and his autonomy and his power, if any generation of rising lawyers were allowed or encouraged to discover the real truth about the stuff they study, which is that all the legal principles they have ever learned about amount to no more than tricks of the trade, and that all the courses they ever take are courses in P&P. And so the law schools stick to their principles and to the pretense that the principles stand for eternal varieties, which lawyers, after learning how to do it, gradually apply to a hurly-burly of man's earthly affairs. The principles, as a matter of fact, used to be dished at the students without so much as any tremblings around them. That was when law schools were a innovation, I should say, scorned by most lawyers as a fit and none too efficient preparation for the practice of law, just as schools of journalism are scorned by most newspaper men today. In those days, and for some time after, law students learn practically nothing but naked principles. The principles of each field of law were sorted out and arranged by sub-principles and counter-principles in a horn book of torts or trust or whatever. The student studies their horn books, listen to lectures devoted mainly in explaining and reconciling the principles so that they appear to fit into what we would call one neat little ball of abstract knowledge, and religiously memorize the principles. They might never so much as read the record of a single lawsuit. Why should they clutter their minds with this disconcerting and trivial facts when they were engaged in learning great and general truths? But late in last century, a reputed revolution in the matter of teaching law began to take the law schools by storm. The new idea was to feed the students the opinions written by judges in actual cases and let them fish for principles among the judges' words. Obviously, it was not the intention of this new approach to legal education to memorize the importance of principles as such. The purpose was to let the students ponder how the law in action made use of its principle. But judicial opinions amounted to no more than explanation of actual legal decisions in terms of the principles that control. The students still had to learn their principles, but they had to find them first. Of course, the students did not have to fish in the dark. In each field of law, a big bunch of opinions was gathered together by some recognized authority in the branch of legal learning and was then arranged according to the principles illustrated by the opinions in a case book. The students then read the right cases in the right order, and the principles practically pop out at them from the pages. The facts behind any case did not really matter and were often omitted entirely from the reprint of the judge's opinion, as were the parts of the opinion that dealt with other fields of law. What was important still was to learn the deathless, Deathless, deathless principles, enhanced a bit in impressiveness by the fact that they were now taken right out of the judge's mouth. The casebook method of teaching law is still the vogue in the law schools. Fledgling lawyers are no longer encouraged to take their principles straight. In order to learn that acceptance of an offer is essential to the validity of a contract, they must plow through half a dozen verbose judicial outpourings, which say just that it is 1,000 times the space. In order to learn that it is unconstitutional for a state to attempt to tax property outside of its jurisdiction, they must worry through 5 or 10 judicial gems like Senior versus Braden. But when they have finished, they will usually have learned no more than that the acceptance of an offer is essential to the validation of the validity of a contract, or that it is unconstitutional for a state to attempt to tax property outside its jurisdiction. In many ways, the old-fashioned horn book method of legal education made more sense. It was more direct and more straightforward, and you could learn more principles faster. Law students today pay tribute to it when, after taking a course from a case book, they study for their examination in the course from a horn book. Moreover, it is interesting commentary on the most advanced law schools, which have carried the case book method to such extremes that the principles do not always come quite clear to the students, that their graduates invariably have to take special cram courses in the bare principles of law in order to pass their bar examination and be admitted in membership to the legal fraternity. As a matter of fact, these advanced law schools, and there are only a handful of them, with their extreme use of the case method of teaching, deserves a special word. Despite the fact that they do not teach their students the law any too well, they do teach something else. In so doing, they are traitors to the legal legend and potential threat to the perpetration of the racket of the law. But they actually encourage their students to dig out of the cases a little more than abstract legal principles. The of all human facts they bring in dispute into court are rated as worth consideration, not merely as an excuse for their application of the law, but their own right. These few law schools still divide legal education into courses based on different fields of law, but the courses in the fields are more likely to be cut out of according to the types of practical problems. Something such as government control of business or corporation management, instead of according to tables of abstract principles. More significantly though, regardless of course names, the courses themselves or most of them, for even the most advanced law schools, cannot entirely avoid law consecrated teachers, are taught with a different emphasis. That emphasis is on the non-legal aspect of earthly affairs and problems which the facts of any lawsuit bring to light. Students are trained not to discard these matters as irrelevant, but rather to concentrate on them, to think about fair and reasonable solutions that might be applicable to various kinds of problems. Still, from the practical standpoint, if, for example, or if, for instance, a milk company goes to law to protest against a state statute setting the price of milk, the past profits or lack of profits of the milk distributors, I should say, the medical need of milk for slum children, the present financial shape of dairy farmers, the personnel and liability of the government agency doing the price setting, all may be treated as just as important as the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. That is, the police powers of the state in question, or the affection or non-affection of the milk industry with a public interest. If a widow sues a railroad company because her husband was killed at a grade crossing, the annual toll of grade crossing facilities and the cost of eliminating such crossing altogether, and the well-known weakness of both judges and juries when confronting with weeping widows, may all come in discussion along with the doctrines of contributive negligence, proximity clause, and the last clear chance. Not that the principle of law are altogether neglected in their advanced law school courses. The students inevitably still read and memorize and try to reconcile the same old concepts and abstractions. But the tough meat of factual problems is mixed into their educational diet. The cases before are the cases become more than settings for the sanctification of legal principles. Now the result of this kind of teaching are strange and varied. In the first place, the fledgling lawyers do not learn their principle nearly so well as their predecessors used to learn them by the Hornbook method, nor as their contemporaries learned them by the regular casebook method. The intrusion of factual issues of other consideration which touch the law only remarkably make the principle harder to concentrate on and harder to remember. This is why they have to take cram courses after they graduate from law school in order to pass their bar examination. The bar examination and the cram courses deal almost exclusively with the law. Moreover, they attempt to tie together the real problems that lie behind all law cases and the abstract principles on which decisions in law cases are said to be based usually result in one of two things. For the less intellectual, sturdy students, the results will be utter confusion. They will neither understand the problems nor learn the principles. But for the brighter boys, the results will likely be a realization that the problems and the principles have very little in common. From that realization, it is but a short step to a sort of unformulated contempt for the law and its principles. And if legal neophiles should ever begin to realize en masse that legal principles are largely constructed of long words, irrelevant abstractions, it will be the beginning of the end of the legal legend. That is the only way that the inflated mask of hokum known as the law might ever be exploded from the inside. But it is a possibility so remote that it is ridiculous to contemplate. The vast majority of legal apprentices in the vast majority of law schools still go blissfully or pulling principles out of judges' opinion, being taught in mental goose step the sacred language of concepts and precepts to emerge as duly and undoubtedly defenders of the legal tradition and perhaps to become eventually Wall Street law partners or Supreme Court justice. These comparatively few students of those comparatively few law schools who do learn to recognize the great gap between worldly problems and legal principles and who do not later fall prey to the propaganda of the trade they are practicing and forget all they once knew, can become extremely useful citizens. They have been trained to look at every legal problem as what it really is, a practical problem in the adjustment of men's affairs. They have been taught how to throw aside the entangling trappings of legal language and seeking a fair and reasonable and workable solution. And then having found such a solution, how to wrap it up again in respectable legal clothes and work for it in terms of principles of law. In short, they have learned how to treat the whole of the law as a technique, as a means to an end, as pleading and procedure. And more than that, they have learned something woefully rare among the modern medicine men, they have learned to concentrate on the end, which is the practical solution of a human problem, instead of it on the means, which is the law. Nor is it merely a question of being able to phrase a desirable result in legal language and support it with acceptable legal principles. That, because of the nature of legal principles, is a pushover. Every lawyer can do that. Every lawyer does that. Every time he handles a case, although he may not always be aware that he is using a tool rather than fighting for the right in the realm of ultimate truth, and instead a question of going at the solution of human problems in an intelligent and practical and sociable, useful way, and then only then reverting to the medium of the law. It is the question of applying to any set of facts a combination of common sense and technical information and justice, undiluted by ambitiously principles, and letting the law fall where it may. Yet, one bothersome query remains about the rare law school products who have learned how to do this. Why should their minds and their courses and their subsequent work be constantly encumbered with a lot of fool principles? Why, after all, should they have had to learn the law too? And that's the conclusion of chapter 9 tonight. And let's see, we're going to continue to go into this chapter. I'm going to see something here. Look through this real quickly. Okay, we're going to probably wrap this up. I'm not going to do another chapter. It's getting late here where I'm at. I just think what it will do is we'll stop at this point, and it should be in 27 minutes. I appreciate again you being here. I appreciate your hoping that you're learning something here about how lawyers have construed certain things and claiming it's law when reality it is not law, and they're not seeking justice anymore. It's become a mixed bag of all kinds of tricks, you see. So have a good night. You take care. We'll talk to you another day.